This is another video from Mahogany Pink, giving her opinion on black love.
This is a bride, this is a bride, and this is a bride. Every year, 2.5 million women in America walk down an aisle and say, I do. On a macro level, this is a political and economic maneuver, the first step in building a legacy with another person, a tradition as old as civilization itself. And while problematic many elements of marriage can be, it's also a social, spiritual, and cultural milestone that most women dream about making in their lifetimes. And then there's you. Maybe you're being strung along in one of those time-wasting extended domestic partnerships. Your man doesn't make the kind of money to save up for a decent wedding ring, let alone a wedding ceremony. Rather than add to his stress by requiring that he make that commitment anyway, you decide marriage is just a piece of paper and all of those frills aren't necessary. You could go down to the courthouse, but it's not romantic. He didn't ask, and even if he did, he's got bad credit, owes back child support to his first baby's mother, and you don't really want to be legally responsible for his payday loan debt. When you commit to a dusty, you commit to giving the milk away for free because he can't afford to buy the cow. Maybe you're in college and there isn't a single man on campus who's taking relationships seriously. Men that age get the advice to sow their royal oats, and they're doing just that. You'll find yourself in competition with women who have looser morals and lower standards. The men you date claim they don't love these hoes, but it doesn't stop them from sneaking behind your back to get with them. If you can't beat them, you can join them, or you can just stay single. You might be part of the post-grad, highly educated but single group of black women. Educated black men are in short supply, and so finding someone on your level intellectually who shares your value of education seems impossible. Every date that you go on, you have to dumb yourself down lest the man across the table start rolling his eyes. If you can manage to keep your conversation at plebeian level, you might have a chance, but he'll feel uncomfortable in your social circles, and communication with him will feel like pulling teeth, as everything you say will seem like an insult to him or go over his head entirely. Maybe you're one of the new high-earning career black women. You might have grown up in a neighborhood where the men expect you to go 50-50 on the check. And so you figured if you were going to have to pay your way with a man, you'd rather split the bill at Wolfgang Puck's than at Buffalo Wild Wings. So getting your money right was top priority. But your ability to break out the American Express Platinum card and handle your business when it needs to be handled intimidates most black men, as they tend to prefer less competent women whom they can impress. You could date men who don't mind a woman paying his way from time to time, but you're not interested in being anyone's sugar mama. Perhaps you're in a phase of healing after a traumatic struggle love relationship. Unlike other women who spend a few weeks in bed with a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream after a breakup, some black women need a full exorcism, a healing circle, acupuncture, and one of those how Stella got her groove back trips to the Caribbean before they can even think of dating again. Maybe you're in a big city and the black men around you have unlimited access to their preferred phenotypes. You, however, are unambiguously black. You might be a little overweight, and only Fenty Beauty carries your foundation shade. You're not exactly black men's first choice, and the only ones who approach you are looking to smash and pass. You can smell your time being wasted a mile away, so you'd rather just stay single. Or maybe you grew up in a strict religious household. Certain parts of your body were seen as sinful, and connection to your own sexuality needed to be suppressed. You never entirely embraced your own femininity. You were metaphorically castrated at puberty in your parents' hopes that you wouldn't be passed around like the other girls in your neighborhood. The men in your religion didn't get such strict governance over their bodies, and so they're pursuing women who have no problem stepping into their sexuality. These men unfortunately see you as a eunuch or a genderless cousin of sorts. That is, if they see you at all. Black women, your stories are as varied as the stars in the sky, but one thing is constant in Black America. Fewer black women are finding love, getting married, and having children than ever before, despite the desire to do so. And for the last decade or so, mainstream media has highlighted, lowlighted, underscored, and magnified how many of you are still searching for your individual black love story. So much so that they're starting to make it look like you're begging.
Millions of black women, many blessed with brains and beauty, finding the right man is proving elusive. But why?
Black men, we want all y'all back. Because we love you, we see you, kings, and most importantly, we need you.
70% of black women aren't married. That's roughly true.
And sometimes I feel that we're women, black women, are really left alone. So there's this kind of quiet
pain. It's quiet, but it's there.
Black women seem to be the last choice oftentimes for when it comes to dating.
In part 1 of this video series, we established that there is a large sex ratio imbalance in the hetero black dating scene, and sociologists have named the main culprits to be mass incarceration, male underemployment, and what Dr. Umar Johnson would call the snow bunny crisis. When you already know the socioeconomic reasons that explain why black women have a harder time finding a partner than other women, calling a bunch of black aspiring actors to go on camera and pick at black women's faults seems a little cruel and perhaps inappropriate when it's coming from a media outlet that claims to be there to uplift you. Now, for those of you who have plans for your life that don't include being a wife, I raise a well-manicured fist of solidarity. But for everyone else, this saga of perpetual singledom has social, mental, and economic consequences. And the black community says that you are to blame for those consequences. Black love is dead, and the modern black woman killed it. You weren't feminine enough. You weren't submissive enough, and you chose the wrong men in your younger years. This holy trinity of undesirableness is what you have to blame for black men's unwillingness to put a ring on it, or so that is the story being told. Black women's self-reliance and independence is constantly being framed as a negative, as what is killing your relationships with black men. Unfortunately, it's true. While you're right to feel as though you're being demonized for your competence, you know the culture is bad when the educated women are viewed as the problem instead of the uneducated, underemployed men. But assertiveness, ambition, and a get-it-done no matter what kind of attitude are seen as masculine traits, and black men go to great lengths to perform masculinity as compensation for lacking those traits. Your ability to sustain yourself with or without them undermines their self-image as the dominant gender. In his book, Is Marriage for White People?, Stanford professor Ralph Richard Banks outlines how women of all races are moving ahead academically, financially, and socially, while the men are falling behind. This gap in achievement is greatest amongst African Americans. Twice as many black women as black men graduate from college every year, and while the manosphere likes to focus on all of you getting quote-unquote useless degrees in the humanities, you're more than 60% of all black students in STEM majors, as well as almost 70% of all black STEM postgraduate students. You outnumber black men almost 2 to 1 in law school and medical school, and there are more black women than black men in the workforce. Additionally, more than half of all black men ages 18 to 30 still live at home with their parents. 1 in 5 black men will have spent some time in jail or prison by age 30, and almost 1/3 of black men will have spent some time in jail or prison in their lifetime. It's interesting.
And to add to that, an article just came out that black men are costing the economy $50 billion a year because they refuse to work.
How we overlook this grim reality when discussing why black love is in jeopardy and jump straight into blaming PhDs and hot girl summers. Since most people choose their partners based on proximity, and black women are in closest proximity to black men, black women have the smallest pool of eligible bachelors to choose from in the United States, so long as they limit their search to black men only. This goes almost entirely overlooked by the black community at large, as your unwillingness to date the dusties of the community is chalked up to you being too picky. But Banks debunks this myth that black women have standards that are too high. In fact, his research shows the opposite. It shows that black men are actually the pickiest when it comes to commitment. While these men would be seen as just average in other communities, Banks explains that black men who have managed to stay out of jail, get an education, and land a well-paying job have a premium placed on them in the black community, and thus exhibit an unwillingness to settle down and build with one woman, raising their expectations of what women should offer in a relationship, while women's expectations of men simultaneously begin to lower. In one of the most damaging ways that we witness this imbalance of expectations is in the rise of concurrent relationships, that is, a dating practice where sexual partners overlap without the consent of all parties involved, or in Blackistan's case, man sharing. Banks explains that black women are involuntarily sharing their men at an alarming rate in the US, and the result is a public health crisis, as black women are 3 times more likely to contract a sexually transmitted disease from their quote-unquote committed partners than women of other races. And if you're not sharing the few eligible bachelors that do exist in the black community, you, black women, are settling for the uneducated and financially strapped men left over, as you are the most likely to be hypogamous of all women of all other races. You're co-signing the car loans, you're fronting $50 until he gets his next paycheck, and you're doing the walk of shame through his mother's kitchen every morning. It's been this way for a century, but that simply isn't good enough anymore. anymore. Black men want you to be submissive as well. They want a performance that suspends their disbelief, where they can feel like they're in a relationship where you're dependent on them. Even though more middle and upper class Americans have taken a more egalitarian approach to relationships in the last 20 years, Black men have made it abundantly clear that they do not want to be your equals. To be fair, there absolutely have been systems in place that have directly and indirectly hindered Black men's ability to provide for a family. But Black men's unwillingness to commit to a family comes from centuries-old habits of not expecting men to be present for the rearing of their children, a habit they refuse to kick today because it benefits them as individuals. The Black manosphere loves to misinterpret the data of sociologist Daniel Patrick Moynihan, whose 1965 report on Black American poverty has been twisted to spread misinformation that single mothers had permanently destroyed the Black nuclear family by kicking Black fathers out of the home so that they could stay at home and collect welfare. Besides the fact that this notion already seems like a reach when even in the 1960s,
if these women kick the fathers out the home to collect welfare, let's say that's true, doesn't that mean that the fathers weren't making enough money? Because I'm pretty sure welfare wasn't paying much anyway.
most Black women were not on welfare, and more than half of all welfare recipients were white women and children, yet the white nuclear family wasn't disrupted. Nonetheless, what they're referring to, the man in the house rule, denied welfare benefits to any woman who had an able-bodied man in the home. What is rarely ever mentioned is that welfare, then called the AFDC program,
they was denied welfare if they had a man in a home that was able to work. That's what that was about.
Required that the women keep a job as well. What is rarely ever mentioned is that the man in the house rule was only implemented in 12 of the 50 states and lasted only 5 to 8 years depending on the state. And what is rarely ever mentioned is that the man of the house rule, nicknamed the stepfather clause, was created to address the increase of men living in the apartments who were not the fathers of the children in residence. It prevented poor women from having domestic relations with men who weren't their baby daddies. A morality clause, if you will. But the fathers of their children were already gone. In order to receive benefits, a woman had to be widowed, divorced, deserted, or never married at all, something that applied to many Black women. Desertion, or what Moynihan would call the poor man's divorce, was most common with Black men. Barely any Black women filed for divorce back then. But the poor man's divorce was a social phenomena that Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin would discuss around the time that this was occurring.
And it's not anything that you have done or not done. By some arbitrary sentence. How in the world, if I can't get a job, if I can even get my axe out of the pawn shop, if I can even get money to get on the subway, how am I going to love anybody except in such an awful pain and rage that nobody could bear it? How in the world I can't come with nothing? I know it doesn't make any sense to me, keep a man built like that.
You see, but I've seen so many people get so hung up in such crappy, superficial kind of things that for lack of being able to bring a steak in the house, they won't come. I can get my own damn steak.
Nikki,
I need you.
Nikki,
and that's what the Black, no, really, I mean,
yeah,
that's to me what the Black
yeah, but
man
Nikki, you're perfectly right. But you're being perfectly rational.
But it's a rational situation.
Yeah, but love is not a rational situation.
Love must be. It must be rational. Because this irrationality that we have does
Look,
not work. It destroys people.
No mention of women kicking men out of the home en masse in this conversation. Why? Because that's not what was happening. So the manosphere can say what they'd like about Black women kicking Black men out of the government-owned housing that they occupied, and this somehow snowballing into the single mother epidemic we have now. But Black men's willingness to abandon their families is well documented by sociologists, psychologists, and family courthouses across the nation.
I ain't thinking about holding up for no sex, my man. You know, if a girl, she get having a baby, carrying a baby, hey, that's on her. I'm not gonna stop my pleasures because of another woman.
No, it doesn't look like going to the store for a pack of cigarettes and not returning like it did throughout the 60s and before that. And it doesn't look like vehement denial of paternity like it did in the 70s and 80s. Today, it looks like infidelity, picking unnecessary fights, and frequent absenteeism shortly after pregnancy until the relationship becomes untenable. A coward's way of bowing out of his responsibilities. We could blame this on poverty and discrimination, but other poor and marginalized groups did not have a desertion problem in the 1960s. In fact, some had marriage rates that were better than their white counterparts. This isn't a problem in other communities because other communities put the responsibility of keeping a family together on its men, not its women.
Because a man who doesn't spend time with his family can never be a real man.
And instead of acknowledging that many black men frequently bail on responsibilities in relationships with women they get pregnant, the manosphere regresses to their choose better mantra, or simply whines about being undermined by women and the welfare system for being third-place providers in the households that they created. It should be no surprise that a group of men who are never held responsible for anything have a hard time being responsible for anything. This entire community is to blame for this pathology. Black fathers rarely set good examples of manhood for their sons to emulate, and single black mothers rarely prioritize pushing their sons to be providers for the women that they date. Not only do these black women often have a negative view of other black women, often a projection of their low self-image, but the fear that these pseudo-husbands of theirs will grow up and leave them to take care of these other women is ever present. We are all complicit in the casual emasculation of low expectations of black men, and no one wants to say that they are doing poorly and they need to do better, lest they decide to abandon the community entirely, which they always threaten to do. So instead, we tell black women to accomplish less and settle for less, to clip their wings so that black men forget that they cannot fly. And the result is a dilapidated community with no providers, where no man feels it's his responsibility to repair it because no man wants to play cleanup crew for a mess they believe someone else created. Yes, there are good black men, but in the mind of every black man, he's the good black man. Black men often assign a benevolence to themselves that doesn't exist because they have the luxury of being able to compare themselves to the massive group of degenerate males that occupy this community. They can be underachieving and maladapted. They can keep playing the field or playing Call of Duty until they're 45 years old. As long as they're not committing felonies, they should be congratulated. And as long as women who are objectively out of their league skip over them, they can continue to believe the lie that it's you who are in fact causing the community's marriage problem. But this perpetual state of arrested development is one of the biggest problems with black love, as these men put commitment and family building on a timeline that is detrimental to the women in their age group, who are iced out of the possibility of marriage for most of their youth. They tell you to prioritize looking for a husband in college so you don't have this problem. But in a culture where the men are the gatekeepers to marriage, wouldn't that be a task you would assign to the men? If rebuilding was truly the goal, wouldn't it be more successful if the men were marrying the women that they are already sleeping with and or getting pregnant in their 20s, instead of encouraging them to run up the clock until the last minute, leaving their female peer group to seek out alternative sources of security and provision? Apparently, that's too big of an ask. So, you are bobbing for apples blindfolded in a bucket where half of the apples are spoiled, but the community has the very unrealistic expectation that you must choose the right one, because you all should be able to discern good men from bad men on sight, because men do not ever lie, men do not ever misrepresent themselves, men do not ever string women along, and men do not ever change. And even though everyone else can see that your unbridled loyalty and love for black men is not being reciprocated, watch the community press on with their manipulations. If they don't intentionally misinterpret marriage stats to make it seem like more black men are marrying you than they actually are, they're policing your responses to the problem. They'll say something like, dating out isn't going to solve every single problem in your life, you know. It's not going to cure world hunger or the Middle Eastern conflict, so you shouldn't do it. Or, just take a look at yourself, have some accountability. Maybe you're the problem. Or they'll say something like, sure, you can date out, do what you want, but only do it for the right reasons. Only do it after you've prayed and fasted for 40 days and nights, smudged your entire zip code with sage, and got permission from the president. Otherwise, your reasons just aren't good enough, because not wanting to be in the next generation of baby mamas or hermits married to Jesus isn't good enough. How bad does the black single mother rate have to be? How many pregnant girls do you need to see riding the bus? How many single women do you have to help carry their strollers down the subway steps before you realize that this is the likely outcome for those of you who have children with black men? And the likely outcome for those of you who open up your options is that you get engaged on the same timeline as the national average. But if you decide to play the waiting game in the hopes of finding black love, it's going to cost you. The men are being instructed to keep dangling the carrot of security over your head, claiming that they're only willing to marry you if you're feminine, fit, friendly, and blah, blah, blah. But they're already sleeping with you, already getting you pregnant, already living in your apartment on discounted rent. It's too sweet of a deal to keep you on the hook, and you ladies are falling for the okie doke, the old dusty bait and switch, asking you what do you bring to the table when they're already eating off of your plate. This hamster wheel that black women are on in the pursuit of black love only serves the men because it increases your desperation and thus lowers your expectations. And because it serves the men, the narrative will always be that you're not trying hard enough and you're not looking hard enough. Look at all of these token images of black love. It's not the numbers, it's you. You haven't found black love because you're not listening to men well enough. You're not giving the men what they want. You're not doing enough. You're not good enough for black men. You need to be doing what white or Asian or other groups of women are doing to keep their men. Black men's practice of comparing black women to women of other races is age old. You, your mama, and your mama's mama were told that non-black women make better wives and that you need to take a page out of their books and learn to be more cooperative. And every criticism of black women from black men starts with, you want to know why we date women of other races? But they can't explain why these relationships tank faster than yours. They can't explain why black men in interracial marriages have higher divorce rates than their marriages to you. They can't explain why black men and white women have the highest divorce rate of all marriage pairings, both interracial and same race in the country. And they can't explain how your divorce rates go down when you marry men from other communities. If you're the real problem and Becky supposedly does it better, the math just ain't mathin'. But they continue to spout out that unlike these other women, you are not doing enough for your men. But who has done for their men in this country what you have done for yours? What women in this country marched with their men, were willing to die for and beside their men, shot at the police off the roof for their men, soldiered in every organized and disorganized crime syndicate for their men, kept having their children when the men had nothing to offer them, and took on the state with their men? So now your image has become synonymous with struggle, antagonism, aggression, and righteous indignation. You want to fight with white men on cable news on behalf of black men who are fully capable of doing it for themselves and wouldn't do the same for you. You backed them up. Now they want to tell you that what you bring to the table isn't what they really value, after they've already exploited your highly undesirable strength for the last 4 generations. And as long as black men can convince themselves that your achievements, your education, your work ethic, and your salary aren't actually valuable to their lives, they can convince themselves that your desire to pair with someone on equal footing as yourself is entitlement. Black men's ability to correctly appraise the value of something has always been inadequate. They sold out a continent with the most abundant natural resources on the planet for cloth beads and gunpowder. They sold out the civil rights movement for plea bargains and white women, sold out that continent again for railroads and Wi-Fi, and now they're going to sell out the future of this community for light-skinned babies and submission to soothe their inferiority complexes. But you're willing to go down with the ship while black men are all over the internet talking about how they're going to save themselves. You're willing to take into consideration every single historical event that might have hindered some black men's ability to be adequate partners today, but they've told you in no uncertain terms that if you don't play into the role that they require you to play into, to hell with you. Generational curses be damned. Now the supposed black thought leaders of the 2020s are counting down the minutes until your downfall, until winter comes for you. And for some reason you believe that your performative pro-blackness is going to reverse this. You believe that if you ignore the issues of every other group in this community, the women, the children, the LGBTQ, the elderly, and the disabled, and focus on propping up the black man at all costs, he will reach back and pull you up with him, even though he has proven time and time again that that is not what is going to happen. That as soon as his pockets are deep enough, he'll wife up a sugar baby from the internet or a penthouse playmate or for a self-proclaimed whore or a bottom-shelf Becky before he'll ever take your PhD. What will it take for you to see that there is no great black nation coming down the pipeline that is not in the agenda of the average black man, despite his words saying otherwise? There will only be a strong black community when black men build one, and not a day sooner than that. But right now, they don't want to help raise the children that are not theirs. They don't want to get the higher education, and they don't want to marry you. You didn't do this to black love. You didn't sell black people into slavery. You didn't shoot Malcolm X. You didn't sell out the Black Messiah for 30 pieces of silver. You didn't shoot up your neighborhoods. You didn't bring drugs into the community. You didn't abandon the children. You didn't give up the fight. But now you should. I'm not saying this because I want you to see black men as your enemies. I'm saying this because if everything that you have to offer someone else is of no value to them, then the offer itself should be taken off the table. Give it to someone who will appreciate it, to someone who will value you. That may not be a black man, but that has to be good enough because you are good enough. This is the generational curse that you need to break, to stop waiting for permission to do what is in your best interest, to stop begging for love, to reject the abusive myth that you're not beautiful and there's nowhere else for you to go, to reject the abusive myth that bringing forth your issues with the black community is a ploy to destroy it, when 1 million black men tune in each week to listen to one of them tell one of you that they can hear the cholesterol in your voice and calling it accountability. You put black men first long enough, and look how that panned out. They put themselves first. You can keep begging for validation if you'd like. You can believe that if you don't get on their program, then you'll have to get a dog and die alone, even though on average you live almost a decade longer than they do, so dying alone is almost inevitable. All that considered, it just might be better to risk dying alone in the pursuit of something greater for your life than having never really lived your life at all. I'm Mahogany Pink. Thank you to everyone who took part in the Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man book study last week. It was a lot of fun. Thank you to everyone who put in the work at my seminars. To get in on the action, join my email list. Instructions to do that are in the description box below. I teach black women the shadow sides of black men and themselves so that they can let go of their baggage, level up, and rest in their femininity the sovereign way. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next time.
She ate in his video, and from what I got from this video is the women of the community is being blamed for all of the problems in our community. We're being blamed for being single mothers, even though it's the father that leaves their children. We're being blamed for not finding suitable partners when it's the men that majority of them are locked up. And the ones that are not locked up can't sustain a job to hold down a whole family. We're being blamed for everything. We're being blamed for why they date out. We're even being blamed and crucified for wanting to go to school and get these educations and get these degrees so we can have better job opportunities for ourselves. But we're only being blamed for that because the men in our community don't value education. So they look down upon us because we value education. So in other words, it takes the men of the community to make the community strong or get the community to where it needs to be. But when you have a men in that community not caring or not trying or could care less about how the community is, he don't realize that society is looking at him for why our community bad. Society is looking at him as to why the community is not prospering. But they too slow to understand that. in order to build a proper community, that's the man's job, not the woman's. So I don't get the confusion. I don't get how black men in our community could be so slow. And then what bothers me is the few black men that do have good jobs. The few black men that do have good jobs are in, taking care of what they need to do and never been to jail or whatever. They are considered the unicorn in the community. So, which makes them have more options and women than they deserve. But this is a reaction video to Mahogany Pink, and she states all facts in this video. And I just wanted to share it. So like, share, subscribe. Tell me what you think. I will respond to your replies.